how to create a tripod mug. First, you're going to need to wedge your clay. You're going to roll it through the slab roller, and you'll need to smooth out the slab. Now you're going to need a lot of clay, so if you need more clay, let me know. I will give you more clay, but you're going to need enough clay to fit a template because you're actually going to cut out this template. Now, before we do that, if you want to apply textures to the slab, you can do that first. You can apply textures onto the slab using a slab roller or a texture mat. But keep in mind that we need about 1 inch of the rim of the mug. It needs to be smooth. This is the top lip of the mug. This is where you would drink out of. So we are thinking about the actual design. So we're going to trim our slab using the template. So if you don't know what template to use, please let me know. I have cut my slab and I don't need the template anymore. If your slab is still plain, you can still add texture. Remember, we do need about 1 inch for the rim. Make sure you have smoothed out both sides of your slab using the rubber rib so we don't have any textures. If you don't want any textures, if you want textures, apply them. But if you want it to be smooth and add the textures later on, make sure you use that rubber rib. Now, let's talk about forming a cylinder. So we do need to bevel. We need to bevel the edges. And this is so when we put the two edges together, they can connect and overlap, and then we create this cylinder. So to do that, we need to think, what direction do we want these two pieces of clay to meet at? So I'm actually going to pick up the slab and just show you. Here we are. So for example, I can trim this side that direction, and then I will trim this side that direction as well, because again, we want these two parts to overlap. So let me actually go ahead and bevel. Remember, there's a couple ways to bevel. One way is to take your slab, have it at the edge of the table, use a felling knife, and then trim along the rim. Okay, I have already beveled the edges and you can see how they fit together here. I have my slip and I already scored them because we need to attach them together now. And it's so much easier when you bevel because the edges can overlap. So we're going to apply some slip. Be generous with the slip because the extra slip will actually help us connect and blend the seams together. So the next step is blending the seams, and don't rush this step. Sometimes students get a little flustered because we need the slab to be soft to make a tripod mug, so they tend to rush this step because everything seems really, really soft. So we're going to spend a little bit of time blending. You can use your rubber rib. Remember, you can bend it. It's flexible, so you can actually smooth out the sides. You can also use your sculpting tools to blend the interior, but this is why we want to make sure the opening is comfortable enough for your hand to get inside there. So I'm going to spend some time blending the edges. Popping in here just to remind you, you do need to blend the interior seams as well. So if you are having a hard time with your fingers blending it, you can use a tool. But again, don't use a lot of pressure because you don't want to accidentally push the walls outward. You need to can add a reinforcement coil. Make sure it's really, really thin, or else you're going to be adding a lot of extra. Now I'm flipping it around to show you the outside. Now my seam is starting to crack, so you really need to be mindful and take care of any seams that are forming, or they will give you trouble later on. So definitely take care of them. Again, if you need to, you can patch a little bit of. So remember, if any of your seams are cracking on the outside or inside of the cylinder, you do need to take care of it. What you can do is take a small piece of clay, score it. You can score where the seam is cracking. Just make sure it's a really small piece because we don't want to end up making the walls thicker. And you can actually place that in there, smooth it out, use a tool as well. Now, if you have texture on the outside of the cylinder, be aware that might get a little smushed, so just be careful. Okay, so decide where you want the bottom of the mug to be, because the bottom of the mug is going to face you up right now. So the bottom of the mug needs to be facing you at this point, because our next step is adding those tripod feet. Tripod means 3. So we need to create this shape with our fingers, and I'm going to show you a tool you can use, but we're pinching the edges inward and downward. Don't rush this step. Again, some students get kind of hesitant and they end up rushing it. But we need the slab to be soft. Okay, if the slab is too hard, you're going to have a hard time making those feet. Now we have to create a triangle like this with our hands. So we can actually help start prompting the clay, and we're only doing the bottom of this mug, right? We're only doing the bottom. So we need these 3 feet to curve inward. Now you can also help this happen by taking your sponge and make sure you get a bunch of water on it, and you can actually start curving it as well. Now we don't need to curve all the way in because we do need to score and slip this before we attach everything together. Now if you notice that the walls on the exterior of the mug are cracking a little bit, don't panic. We can still smooth those out, but we need to start using our tools to help gather these pieces together. Also, be aware of where your seam was. Okay, if your seam is right on the edge of the feet, it could crack clay. So just be really gentle. And again, we're pinching it carefully. We're trying to create a 3-sided triangle here. Now at some point, it's going to get close enough. This is when we have to pause and do any scoring. And I want to show you another way you can score. You can actually use one of these serrated ribs and do a bunch of scoring this way as well. Some students really prefer to use these when they're scoring. Now we're going to do a bunch of cleanup later on the bottom of the mug, so just go ahead and score all of the edges because we don't quite know what parts are going to be touching. Then we're going to apply slip, and again we're going to continue pinching and getting these edges in. Now, if you notice that one side seems longer than the other, again, don't panic, but we do need to start pushing these edges together. And you can also use your sculpting tool to help start blending them. But do you see we now have 3 feet that are starting to appear? All right, I've been working on these attachments. At some point, you will have a hole. Now, I don't have a requirement on how big that hole needs to be, but if there is a hole, we need to fill it with clay. We can usually add like a little button, or we can even actually add a triangle. So the hole on my mug is a little big. It's a bit big, but I don't want to squish these sides anymore, or else it's going to start deforming the feet. And make sure you're rotating your mug once in a while. What we can do is take a piece of clay and actually just cut a triangle. Again, we want a 3-sided equilateral triangle, and we can actually score and slip it to fill that in. And then we can blend it and you won't even see it. So there's a couple options, just depends on how big that hole is. It's not really an aesthetic thing, but we do need to cover it up. I added that triangle on top and continue smoothing. You really need to keep smoothing, but try not to push the walls in or you will start to deform the bottom of the mug. And this is, again, this is where some of my students run into problems. They start to deform the feet. So really just keep smoothing until there's no more indents, no more cracks. Keep rotating the mug. Now, if you've been working on this and the clay seems a little soft, can let this firm up. So I've been working on the feet. If you feel like there's too much clay, you can take a ribbon tool, for example, and just carve away some of it. This might be a bit more aesthetic, but again, if you're just smoothing out the clay and you feel like there's just too much, you can remove some of that extra clay. At some point, you definitely want to get a bat, and you're going to need to place your mug on there. But now we need to clean up the inside of the body. So all the seams, any seams on the walls we need to remove. Any seams on the bottom we have to remove, but be gentle. Don't squish the feet. I have seen students, they're too rough when they're blending everything on the inside, because you can see what's in here, right? They're too rough and then the feet become distorted. They get squished. So if you're trying to work on the inside and your feet keep moving around, your clay might just be too soft, so you'll need to let it firm up a little bit. So to fill in the bottom, we need to probably add maybe some clay as well as blending. You really need your sculpting tools to do a lot of blending in here. We don't really need to add any moisture to the clay. We just need to blend. Now, we want to be careful that we don't trap clay or trap air. We don't want to trap air inside here. So just if you're adding any clay, for example, I have these little crevices. I'm going to take some clay. I'm just rolling out a coil, really thin, small coil. And just to be safe, I'm going to actually go ahead and score on the insides here, just in case, because we don't want any feet to blow up. And I'm going to add scoring and apply slip. So that is your next step, cleaning up the interior. After you clean up the interior, now we need to gently push the belly outward because this mug is going to have a little bit of a belly. This kind of helps support the bottom part with the feet. So you should have also cleaned up the inside to the best of your ability, because however you clean up the inside, it's going to stay that way when it's fired. Now to push the belly outward, we can use a tool like our sponge. We can also use our hands. So one way to do it is to gently cradle your mug and to gently just push out with your fingers, but you want to be really gentle. When you push this belly outward, it does start to make the walls thinner and you could possibly collapse your project by mistake. So really important that you continually feel around as you're pushing the belly outward. And again, it's the belly. We're not pushing all the walls. We're just trying to get this to bulge out a little bit. And it's starting to on my end. Now, if you notice any cracks developing, like there's a crack developing right there, it's hard to see, you do need to address it as it happens. So pause the pushing out of the belly and take care of that. So I worked on pushing out the belly. And once you're done cleaning everything up, if you don't have any textures yet, now it's time to apply your textures. You could add three-dimensional things, which are appliques. You could add impressions, though I'd be really careful adding impressions on the walls because you don't want to deform your mug. You could add incising, which is like drawing on the clay, or you can even do carvings. After you add your textures, then you're ready to create your handle. Now your handle is going to be created separately. There's a separate video on how to do this. When you create your handle though, consider the textures and the size of your mug.